Wow, I am working now since 20 years for Zühlke. Let's have a look at that amazing journey. My journey at Zühlke started the 1st of February 2002. After a very hard interview, I got hired at Zühlke and I could start as a junior software engineer in the area of the Windows and embedded solution, which were led by Philipp Sutter, which is nowadays the chairman of the board. Back then, Zühlke had 219 people and had locations in Zurich, Frankfurt and London. My first project was in the industry area. There we created with C++ a big software where you could design whole power plants and calculate their efficiency. Right from the start, I was educated in .NET programming language, in the rational unified process, in design patterns. And one of the greatest things was the 5-day camp where the whole unit was going into a remote location and we were coding and exploring new technologies together. Just at that time, when I started, the .NET crisis hit the whole IT industry. I was one of the last persons for the next 2 years which got hired at Zühlke. The highlights of this year was clearly how the Zühlke management was dealing with this crisis. Of course, also the camp was absolutely great and the people and the culture at Zühlke. The year 2003 was still a crisis year. Due to the hiring stop, the number of employees has reduced to 189 people. I continued working on that power plant software in C++. I was getting better and better at C++, but of course I also invested my education time into .NET and into model-driven architecture. I came up with the proposal of creating a snow event at Zühlke where a whole unit was going into the mountains skiing. And we did it. And this was absolutely amazing. And again, I also came up with the proposal of creating a game event where we are coming together at Zühlke and gaming some computer games. And again, of course, we did that and it was a big success. Of course, also in that year, we did our regular camp where we explored new technologies. By the way, just for the record, in the year 2003, the development of Android started and Tesla was founded. Because of my great work at this power plant software in C++, I got promoted in 2004 to an advanced software engineer. In this year, we started the migration of this power plant software from C++ to C#.NET. In 2004, the crisis was over and Zühlke was growing again to 223 persons. During this year, I was looking at .NET security, software estimation, and of course, again, the highlight, the camp, the snow event, and the game event. And just for the record, in 2004, Facebook was founded. In 2005, I changed the industry. I came into another project. Now I was in the insurance industry. There I developed a WinForms application in .NET. I also had a change in the unit and in the line manager. I was now in the APS with Ueli Kleb, which is today the Chief Coordination Officer at Zühlke. Zühlke was recovering from the crisis and had now 241 people. And again, just for the record, this was also the year where Reddit and YouTube were founded. Because I didn't know if I should continue my technical career or should I go more into project management and then management, I started an EMBA. In 2006, we were already 247 people at Zühlke, and we have established a new location at Hanover. I have been appointed with a new project in the electricity industry where I was able to build up an ASP.NET website. I continued my EMBA, and of course I also went more into requirements engineering and also into user experience. And again, just for the record, this was also the year when Twitter was founded. In 2007, I became an expert software engineer. My new project was at the airport, and we were using there the newest technology, which was Windows Presentation Foundation and .NET. At that time, I got certified ISTQB tester. I also investigated more and more the Windows Workflow Foundation and .NET 3. At that time, Zühlke has become 298 employees, and we have established a new location in Bern and in Munich. At that time, I have introduced the WPF architecture blueprint, which is still nowadays in use in legacy projects. And just for the record, this was also the time when Steve Jobs has introduced the first iPhone. I started 2008 with a sabbatical of 3 months where I and my wife traveled through Australia and New Zealand. 2008 was again a crisis year. It was the financial crisis. It was amazing how good Zühlke and the Zühlke management dealt with this crisis. At that time, Zühlke had 329 employees. I focused at that time my education on the new web technology Silverlight, on unit testing, on WCF, which was the Windows Communication Foundation, and on Agile and Scrum. And just for the record, this was also the time when GitHub has been founded. In 2009, the crisis continued and Zühlke was growing slowly to 355 people, and we established a new location in Vienna. In 2009, I became promoted to a lead software architect. And because of that, I and Markus Leder, one of my colleagues, have created the .NET Architectural Circle. This was one of the first focus groups or community of praxis at Zühlke, and it was also the blueprint of all of the communities of praxis that we have nowadays. This circle focused on the architecture in the area of the Windows technology and the .NET technology. At that time, I was in a project where we were implementing with WPF in the hearing care industry. In that year, I focused my education on Microsoft SQL, on Scrum, on conflict management, and of course, again in .NET. 2009 marks also the year where Bitcoin has been invented, and also the first DevOps days have been established in Ghent. From there on, the DevOps movement spread all around the world, and nowadays I'm also one of the organizers of the DevOps Days Zurich. In 2010, the whole financial crisis was over and Zühlke was growing to 402 people. I focused my training on .NET 3.5 and of course, because I was a lead software architect, on architecture. And in that year, I also, together with my colleagues, created the Client Technology Days, which was a 2-day mini conference in Switzerland, completely focusing on user experience, on UI design, on user interface technology. And just for the record, 2010 was also the year when Steve Jobs has introduced the iPad. In 2011, because of the great success of the first Client Technology Day, we did exactly again another Client Technology Day in that year. My educational focus lied on Scrum and on communication. I changed also the project. Now I worked in the network industry and I created there, together with my colleagues, a WPF application in .NET. This was also the time when Zoom was founded and Instagram was founded. And in 2011 also Gartner predicted DevOps as enterprise adoption ready. And you can imagine it was again time for a sabbatical. Now for 5 months, and together with my wife, I went through the US and then through Australia. In 2012, Uli Kleb was handing over the management of RPS to Marco Balzerini, which is still with Zühlke and is leading nowadays the digital consulting. Of course, we continued the success story of the Client Technology Days also in 2012, and the focus of my education was lying on architecture and conflict management. Zühlke was growing. We established a new location in Hamburg and we were growing to 551 people. And just for the record, this was also the time when Windows 8 was released and Google Drive. In 2013, I got promoted to a principal consultant. And I changed the industry. I worked for the banking industry. There I modernized a ASP.NET application. And because of the application modernization, I focused my education on clean code and architecture. Because of the very successful 3x Client Technology Days, Zühlke created the Software Engineering Days, which were a global conference for all of the software engineers at Zühlke. At that time, Zühlke was 629 people and we established another location in Belgrade. And just for the record, 2013 was also the year when Docker was released. In 2014, I became a team lead in the newly founded CTU, which was the Client Technology Unit led by Christian Moser. Christian Moser still works at Zühlke. He's now the head of the digital experience practice. In that year, I focused my education on architecture, on leadership, and on facilitating. At that year, Zühlke has grown to 675 people. And again, because of the big success, we did again the Client Technology Days for the 4th time. And just for the record, 2014 was also the year when Kubernetes was released. In 2015, all of the 734 employees of Zühlke came together in Stuttgart for the Zühlke Days. Also in that year, we established the location Stuttgart and Manchester. I focused my education on Agile requirements engineering, on self-management, and of course into DevOps. In 2016, I was honored to become a partner of the Zühlke Group. I also got promoted to a principal consultant. Zühlke was growing to 834 people, and of course we did again another version of the Client Technology Days. I focused my education on architecture, on business agility, and on DevOps. In the year 2016, Microsoft released the HoloLens, and I went, together with my wife, on another sabbatical. Now for 6 months, we went from the US through Canada to Easter Island and then to Bora Bora and back to Switzerland. In 2017, back from the sabbatical, I stayed in the banking industry, but I changed projects. I was now in an Angular and .NET project. I focused my education on self-management, on a UX certification, and still on DevOps. Zühlke had established another location in Singapore and was growing to 952 people. And of course, we did it again. We did another version of the Client Technology Days. And in 2017, Microsoft released Microsoft for Teams, which was becoming in the future quite useful. In 2018, all of the 1062 employees of Zühlke came together again in Stuttgart for the Zühlke Days. In that year, Zühlke established another location in Hong Kong. My education focus lied in 2018 on DevOps and leadership. In 2019, inspired by the great Zühlke Days, we established the Client Technology Days, of course, in Zühlke, and the DevOps Days at Zühlke and the Architecture Days at Zühlke. The main focus of my education lied now on leadership. I was also able to go to Ashridge in England for a leadership training. Zühlke has grown to 1,175 people, and I changed the unit to the competence unit for DevOps led by Oli Brack. In 2020, I got promoted to a distinguished consultant. I stayed in the banking industry, but I was focusing on Agile transformation and DevOps transformations. I focused now on SAFe, on the Scaled Agile Framework, and on DevOps. 2020 was also a year of crisis. The COVID crisis hit us, but despite the crisis, the Zühlke company grew to 1,234 people. And of course, one of the big highlights we had in 2020 was our new office, but unfortunately, due to COVID, we were not able to visit the new office. 2020 is also the year when the Oculus Quest 2 has been introduced. Despite the COVID crisis, for Zühlke 2021 was an absolute great year. We were able to grow our employees to 1,620 people. We opened new locations in Porto and Ho Chi Minh City. Together with Uli Kleb, I established Lean Portfolio Management at Zühlke. Together with Dani Rapp and Nadine Broghammer, we established Participatory Budgeting at Zühlke. And together with Regina Dietico, we founded the Praxis for DevOps. The education focus lied still on SAFe, on the Scaled Agile Framework, and on DevOps. 2022 has just started. I changed into the newly formed DevOps Praxis led by Regina Dietico. I'm working now in various industries on DevOps and Agile transformations. The education focus lies clearly on DevOps and of course also on the continuous delivery pipelines. This is how 20 years at Zühlke look like. These are roughly 4,943 days or 42,000 hours. Zühlke invests heavily into the education of their people. These were roughly 160 trainings. I got 34 certificates, and this is about roughly 100,000 Swiss francs of training. The camps at Zühlke, they are amazing. This is the time when we socialize and when we are going to explore new technologies. I was in 19 camps. Just because of COVID, these were not 20 camps. Of course, apart from the camps, we have a lot of social events that we have with our teams. There were roughly more than 100 social events, and you also saw that I was 3 times in a sabbatical. I was roughly in 25 projects with 15 customers in 8 industries. At Zühlke, you are able to drive new things, like for example the establishing of a snow event, of a game event, of a mini conference like the Client Technology Days, or of lean portfolio management or participatory budgeting. I wouldn't have reached all of that, what I have become, without the absolute great education that I have become and the mentoring in Zühlke. When I first started at Zühlke, I was introduced to different people, and many of them have worked since 5, 10, 20 years at Zühlke. And I was surprised that so many people were working so long at Zühlke. And now I am one of these people who also worked 20 years at Zühlke. And I'm pretty sure that I will stay 20 and more years at Zühlke.